Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, patch 7.3.2 just hit the PTR, but don't worry, it mostly seems like this patch is just Blizzard making a few tweaks, implementing some back-end stuff, and also, a big chunk of the ending of Legion is just there, including how the Argus fight goes down and what happens directly afterwards. But what I really care about for the purposes of this video is what it suggests about the next expansion, and it sounds awesome. So, this is still, it's a very heavy, spoilery video, so do bear that in mind, but that said, I think they're setting up some really cool content and storylines. To very quickly get you up to speed in the lore, basically, we attempt to kill Argus, that leads us to the seat of the Pantheon, and when we're there, basically, we end up trapping Sargeras in stasis, while also shutting down the Legion's ability to rapidly regenerate demons after they've been killed, which really, when you think about it, is a bit like, say, the Resurrection ship in Battlestar Galactica. Of course, a sacrifice has to be made, and both Illidan and the Pantheon are also locked up in there with him. Just before he goes into stasis, though, Sargeras does something that has not been done since the earliest days of Azeroth. Sargeras stabs the planet. Now, Sargeras is a big boy, so a stab from him is very destructive. The last time this happened is when Aman'Thul killed Y'Shaarj by essentially reaching down through the clouds, picking the old god up and slamming him down. This caused so much damage to the planet that the Titans realized, shit, we could kill the World Soul if we do this again, so they didn't do it anymore, and instead, they waged war with the old gods using their various constructs and things like that. So, fast forward to the present day, and Sargeras has he's just stabbed the planet. Silithus is hit directly and the entire zone takes massive damage. But that's not where our problems end. The World Soul is wounded, with what is essentially her blood seeping out into the surrounding area. Now this is where we get to Khadgar, who says this.
Our world is wounded, champion. Its life essence seeps out into the sands. Just as Magni foresaw, this mere drop of Argus blood surges with incredible power. The might of a Titan. If the blood of Azeroth also proves to be a source of such strength, those who seek to rule this world will stop at nothing to possess it. The days ahead may be dark indeed.
So as we saw in Argus, the blood of the World Soul is a source of immense power. And remember that, the source of the power of the Well of Eternity originated when Y'Shaarj was killed by Aman'Thul, so we've just basically made a Well of Eternity, perhaps even greater, tier source of energy. It's just been created down in Silithus. Now, when you look at Khadgar's dialogue, you might think that he's worried about the old gods using that power or something similar, but if you listen closely, he does say, those who seek to rule this world will stop at nothing to possess this power. The old gods don't necessarily want to rule the world, they want to corrupt it and bring about the Void endgame by corrupting the World Soul. Now, rule, who wants to rule? Our factions, those people. So I think Khadgar is worried about the factions tearing each other apart, and more on that thing later. Now, there's also the fact that we can't ignore this happens in Silithus, right beside Anchorage. So Cthulhu was defeated years ago, but the old gods don't really die that much. Plus, there's all the lore that happened between him and Cho'Gall and Cataclysm. Anyway, the arcane lifeblood is seeping into the sands, so you can be damn sure Cthulhu is going to get a little bath of crazy arcane lifeblood. What could that do? Well, maybe he could use that to corrupt others, maybe he could use it to regain his strength, but he's another player that could be back in the game. Now let's talk about factions. We know that Jaina is very angry at the Horde. She blames them for the failure at the Broken Shore. Now, by the time that we come back, she will likely be in Kul Tiras, probably at the head of what is the greatest naval fleet on the planet. We then have Anduin, who in patch 7.2 decided to take up his father's sword, and this tells us that yes, he's ready to take up the mantle of the king and, lead his people, but how much of his peace-loving, original nature is going to make it through this transition? That remains to be seen. After all, he has just seen his peace-loving mentor Velen finally step up to the plate and take action. His political mentor, Gen, who seems to have a lot of sway over him, similar to Jaina, Gen does not like Sylvanas and the Horde at all. And also, we can't forget that Jaina and Anduin do have a pretty close relationship, which is something that's been seen in the novels and the 5.1 events. So, Anduin's closest friends and advisors. Many of them truly, deeply, viscerally hate the Horde. As for Sylvanas, well, who the hell knows what she's even doing? Her plan was to take control of the Valkyr. That failed in Stormheim, and we have not seen much of her since. Now, much of what was teased about her Legion arc didn't actually come to pass in the expansion, so I think we can be pretty sure that Blizzard have big plans for that character. Perhaps they've decided to wait until Ilaria returns to actually kick those plans off. After all, you've got to remember, Argus was not originally a part of the Legion plan, and, if they know that this character drama could happen when the Three Sisters come back, that probably is when you would want to, do that with Sylvanas. Now, as for her motivations, well, she's always looking for, power. She's got a broad desire to secure a future for her people and also ensure her own survival. She had one, glimpse of being properly dead and damnation when she threw herself off Icecrown, and she does not want that to be a thing again at all, so it seems like she will stop at nothing to basically secure both the Forsaken but also her own life. Now, of course, there's other types of people who usually flock to sources of power. You've got void cultists, maybe some ethereals, the venture company, all the usual suspects, could come back. This would be less of a melting pot and more of a blend tech full of bastards, but it seems like a pretty cool idea. So, what do I think an expansion based off all this jazz would actually look like? Well, for me, I love the idea of us going back to our Alliance versus Horde roots with Warcraft, and based off what I said on Twitter, it seems like quite a few of you think that as well. Now, for me, the core of it is fighting an equal and opposite enemy who's just as smart as you are. This means there can be intertwining narratives where things are unfolding, everyone's making moves against each other, and I really like the idea of just having that whole, you're a member of your faction. I think that's something that people can rally behind, get hyped behind. You can have, even if you were to bring world PvP into things as well. Plus, another thing is, when you're taking maybe some of the science fiction and fantasy elements away, it could leave us with a little bit more drama. I often find that fantasy movies end up being some of the most bland when they're done badly because they rely on the fantasy visuals, but they forget that, it's great for something to have loads of fantastical elements, but it still has to have a core good human story. Sure, dragons and lich kings are awesome, but you have to have the human element. I think sometimes Blizzard focus so much in big, flashy, epic moments that they sort of fail in the emotional arc of a story. I think that faction-based conflict allows for characters to really shine and would give us enough plot runway for some longer storylines and stuff that I think would genuinely be really exciting. Now, the setting is also kind of ideal. The big bad man in the sky has just been sort of taken away. We know, yeah, sure, us, our characters, the people in the know, we know about the Void, but that's probably not the mood on Azeroth in general. Plus there's characters like Sylvanas, who, Sylvanas, she's a chancer, right? She probably would try to seize power anyway, and think, we'll deal with the Void later. And then as far as how the Void elements could come into this story, well, imagine we're all back on Azeroth, players are noticing hints of the old gods in the questing, but it's mainly faction sort of combat. And then, at some point, be it a level zone or a patch, boom, the old gods, their plans sort of springs. Cthulhu wakes up, N'Zoth reveals himself, and shit just gets real. Now sure, we found great power in Argus, but, at this point we would have made ourselves weak by fighting, and that would be the ideal chance for the old gods to strike. And I think that would be a brilliant narrative to go for a future expansion, and at least some parts of that were kind of hinted at by the end of this raid. Now, moving away from the lore, I think there's always been a bit of an interest of Blizzard using their new scaling tech to actually, make the old world kind of bigger, essentially making World of Warcraft an accurate description of how most players engage with the game, rather than World of Argus, World of Broken Shore, World of whatever the current patch name is. So, how would Blizzard revamp the world? I'm not really sure. You see, one of the things we know about is that Cataclysm faced big problems because Blizzard bit off more than they could chew, and they admitted that, so I imagine they're not that keen to repeat those mistakes. Content creation aside though, even just conceiving and writing a new story for every zone for leveling seems like a massive, massive undertaking. I think that what Blizzard would do is probably use their phasing tech to have a modern day version of the current zones that are in the game, and these zones would be largely the same, but maybe a little bit tweaked, a little bit fixed up, maybe not on fire, and maybe with a few more Alliance versus Horde elements and some old god themes. As for the Alliance versus Horde war stuff, I could see there being regular quests to cover big plot points, but the day-to-day fighting maybe being boiled into, or down into, say, world quests or something like that, that's across the zone, or across the continents. Of course, it would be awesome if that could be super dynamic, but really you get the picture. I think some sort of solution like that would be a way to expand the breadth of content of the next expansion out, without making it so that they have to revamp the entire Azeroth. Now also, we can't forget all that Cultras questing stuff that was data mined in 7.3, we can't forget the fact that Jaina is front and center in the Warcraft BlizzCon art. All of this stuff could point towards us, having a mix of, say, world quest-styled, like Azeroth-ish content, but then, like, the core central zones of an expansion maybe is Cultras and the surrounding islands. Finally, I would like to mention that this is labeled patch 7.3.2, not 7.3.5. It doesn't really have any new features or content, it's just polishing things that were technically included in the 7.3 base patch. So, I still assume that 7.3.5 is in the works, and maybe that could be some sort of content bridge to take us into the next expansion. Now, of course, BlizzCon's almost definitely going to have an expansion announcement, and while officially I expect a year-long wait from expansion announcement to release, I have a sneaking suspicion Blizzard might actually try to surprise us a little bit and try to get it out a little bit sooner. After all, that has been their MO, though of course I doubt that, 77 days after 7.3.5 a new expansion would pop out, because that would be a little bit insane. But yeah, that's my thoughts and hopes for what this could mean for a future expansion. I think for me the core of it is, I don't want to just land back in Azeroth and instantly there is a new big bad sort of villain of the week that we have to deal with. I would like it if we just had some more sort of character stuff and we're dealing with our own affairs and then suddenly something is like sort of sprung up on us. That said, when we think back to, say, Mists of Pandaria, it's also an expansion which didn't really have a big box villain at the very start, and maybe that wasn't the best decision for the hype and the marketing, so it really is hard to tell. But one thing that I do want to point out is that the Alliance versus Horde conflict has been a core part of many of the expansions that have had, I think, some very compelling narratives. Looking at Wrath of the Lich King, the whole Alliance versus Horde stuff, that was, was it front and center? No, but it was a very, very important undercurrent in how it established Garrosh as a character. Moving on to Cataclysm, obviously, Alliance versus Horde was another big key element, and we've sort of lost that as time has went on, so I think that reintroducing some of that stuff back into the game would be quite a good thing. Anyway, I am really keen to see what you guys would actually like with a new expansion, so be sure to let me know down in the comments. Apologies, this video was a little bit quickly edited. I'm rushing out to EGX for the weekend, so yeah, Blizzard's news cycle, of course, does not stop for anyone. But thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.